welcome to the Original Self Podcast. I'm Yvette Dakota, owner of Dakota Life Coaching and a psychology-informed life coach. I explore resilience, mindset, and the courage to become your authentic self. This is a space for honest conversations about growth, identity, relationships, and the messy moments in between that shape who we become. Between the salon chair and coaching sessions, I've watched people move through life with patterns they never notice. Patterns that are subtle, familiar, and incredibly hard to see from the inside. Today, we're going to talk about something many people experience but rarely name. This episode 9 is called Why You Feel Disconnected from Your Life and How to Come Back to It. Hi, and welcome back. I'm really glad you're here because I think today's topic is something a lot of people have been carrying with them for a very long time, but not quite knowing what to call it. Let me start off with a feeling. Not a dramatic one, but a subtle one. The feeling that everything in your life looks fine, but it still doesn't feel right. From the outside, and sometimes even from the inside, things are objectively okay. You have a job, or a relationship, or just a functional routine. You're not in crisis. You're not falling apart. Yet something is still off. It feels off to you. Or it's missing. Something's missing. There is this low, steady feeling underneath everything that you can't quite name. And because you can't name it, you tend to dismiss it. You tell yourself, I'm just tired, or I'm overthinking everything. You look at others and you say, they have real problems, and I should be grateful for what I have. So you just keep going and you keep showing up, but the feeling stays. That's what I want to talk about today. That feeling. Because I think it's one of the most misunderstood and underestimated experiences a person can have. It sneaks in slowly. Sometimes it could take years. And it tends to live right in the gap between the life you're living and the life that actually feels like you. As I said, you're functioning, but functioning and living are not the same thing. And somewhere inside, I think you already know that. Before we go any further, sit with this for a moment. Is there an area of your life right now where things look fine, but don't feel right? You do not have to know that yet. I just want you to notice whether that feeling is familiar to you. So what actually is happening when we feel this way? Where does the disconnection come from? We know and feel that it just doesn't appear all of a sudden. What I'm describing is what psychologists call identity performance. It's also known as identity work. Sociologist Erving Goffman explored this idea extensively in his 1959 book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. He argued that we are essentially performers. We continuously manage the impression we give to others depending on the social situations we encounter. He called it impression management. What he was describing was not manipulation, it was survival. It starts far earlier than most of us realize. I'd like to break down the 3 drivers of identity performance. The first one is adaptation. Adaptation is the automatic reshaping of who we are to fit in our environment. When a child's environment doesn't support their authentic expression, the child builds a version of themselves to comply with expectations of the parents, the culture, the norms. That compliant version is not who they are. It's what they learn to be. And the longer they act like that, the longer it goes unnamed, the more it begins to feel like it's the real thing. That's who they are. The second driver is approval. It's the reward that reinforces the adaptation. So they figure out they have to act a certain way, then the parent gives the approval, and there you go. There's how we act. We know that the idea of love and acceptance being unconditional is not necessarily true. They come with terms. Every time you adjusted yourself and received warmth, inclusion, and praise in return, your brain logs that. Do more of that. Be more of that. The funny thing is, those doing the approving are often and most likely completely unaware they are doing it at all. But the pattern it creates is powerful and lasting, right? The third driver is safety. It's the deepest driver of the three, which makes sense because when belonging feels like survival or a survival need, especially in childhood, and I think it genuinely is, anything that threatens that belonging can feel dangerous. So showing a part of yourself that might be rejected doesn't just feel uncomfortable. To a young nervous system, it can feel like a genuine threat. John Bowlby's attachment theory explains why. So children are biologically wired to stay close to their caregivers. And anything that risks that bond triggers a fear response. So you learned to keep certain things hidden. Not because they were wrong, but because keeping them hidden felt safe, felt accepted, so that you wouldn't lose that caregiver. Think about what you learned as a child, not from what people told you explicitly, but from what you observed and what you experienced. You most likely learned what earned approval was. You learned what made the adults in your life comfortable or uncomfortable. And you learned which parts of yourself were welcomed, which were inconvenient, maybe too loud or too much, too sensitive. Maybe sometimes not enough. Children are wired for attachment and belonging. It's a survival need they learn at an early stage of development. So naturally, you adapt. But you need to know this. What matters most is that the adaptation wasn't a flaw. It was your nervous system doing what it's designed to do. Automatically and below your awareness. You didn't know that you were doing this. It's to keep you safe and connected to the people that you depend on. The performing, the shaping, the adjusting, all of it made sense at the time. It served a real and important purpose. The problem is it's not that we learned to adapt, it's that most of us never received the message that it was okay to stop adapting. And we brought that forward into adulthood. We adapted so thoroughly and for so long that the performed version of ourselves started to feel like the real one. Does that make sense? Can you feel that? The original version, the one underneath all of that adaptation started to feel foreign, even difficult to access. I have felt this way a few times in my life. It always came from trying to, fit in with people that I thought I admired. I overlooked their negative traits. I gradually absorbed them. And without realizing it, I drifted away from my core values. Kindness, justice. There's more. I couldn't fully see how much I had changed. People would tell me, and I just kind of ignored it. I became less tolerant of others and less kind, and increasingly annoyed and sarcastic. But that sarcasm amused my friends, my quick wit, although toxic and pointed towards others, was funny to them. An example of this is I have lived my entire life in Marin. It's a very affluent county known for its money, its beauty, and its famous residents at times. The reasons that the celebrities move here is that the locals don't care, or at least don't seem or project to care about who they are. Acknowledging a celebrity could be considered gauche or beneath us, even. I have heard from many transplanted clients, when they come here, it's very hard for them to get friends, to make friends. And they always say that there's a distinct aura of indifference that they encounter in the people that are from here or have lived here for a long time. I once read in a local magazine that the way we speak here is dubbed Marin speak. An outsider was interviewed, and that is what she said. And what Marin speak is, it's a tone that conveys nothing's a big deal. Nothing bothers us. Nothing can touch us. It's sarcastic, maybe slightly dismissive, and I can slip into it in seconds. It's genuinely second nature to me. But because I know I can speak like that and act like that, I try to catch myself more quickly now and pull it back and be more genuine and put my core values more forward. To continue, there's also something important happening at the level of your nervous system. Our brains have a very strong preference for familiar. Not because familiar is good, but because it's known, basically. And the nervous system treats the known as safe. So even when the role you're playing is exhausting, even when the identity you're performing no longer fits who you are, your nervous system continually tries to pull you back towards the familiar. It's what you know, it's what has worked, and it's the path your system learned to walk in. That's why change is so threatening. Even when you genuinely want to change, it's not weakness, it's biology. Understanding that can take a remarkable amount of pressure off of yourself. That pressure you put on yourself of why am I like this? Now you know you can alleviate the pressure of those questions because it's pure biology. So before we move on, I want to pause here for one moment and ask you questions. Think back to the environment you grew up in. What did you learn was acceptable to show? What did you learn that was safer to hide? How much of what you learned then is still shaping and how you show up now? So let's get specific to recognize ourselves clearly in how we perform. Performing is built into ordinary choices or an ordinary day. And once you start to see it, we can see that it shows up in many places. What it looks like is saying yes when you really want to say no. Not because you want to help or because it aligns with your values, but because saying no feels dangerous. Inside of you, it feels dangerous. It might mean disappointing someone, or being seen as difficult, or losing approval that you depend on, that group that you admired so much. Well, now they're like, well, who's this person? So if you say yes and follow through with it, then some part of you starts to resent yourself because you didn't tell the truth. You didn't say that you didn't want to do it. A perfect example of this in my life is saying yes to events that I don't want to attend because I don't want to disappoint the person asking, right? I think I'm annoyed with them for asking or persuading me to go, trying to guilt me into it. But really, I'm disappointed in myself because I was unable to just say no. Performing is like choosing what makes sense over what actually feels true to you. You make a practical decision or a logical one, the one that you can defend and explain. You justify yourself to other people. The thing that actually calls to you gets set aside because it's too risky or too uncertain. Maybe it's too hard to explain. And over time, you just stop asking what feels true. You don't even notice it. You only ask what makes sense. The distance between those two questions becomes the distance between you and yourself. It can also look like being liked but not known. So you might have a full calendar and people who genuinely care about you and still feel profoundly alone. Because the person they like is not quite the whole person. It's parts of it, but it's not the true you. It's not the authentic you. You've shown them a version that is easy to be around. The version that's maybe agreeable and steady, always there, always showing up. That's the uncomplicated version. While the parts of you that are really complicated or very raw and vulnerable, they never quite make it to the surface. People love you, and you know they love you, but it still doesn't land the way it should because what they love is a curated version of who you are. I've seen this so many times in the hair salon. I'll see a few stylists say, when they're told that their client is there, they'll say, "It's showtime." And maybe that's not just a performance. Maybe it's for their own sake. Maybe it's a protection against emotional drain. There are people that come in and maybe this isn't the nicest way to describe it, but they're soul suckers. And maybe that persona that we present at times is a form of protection. It's a shield, a safeguard, if you will. Performing can also look like living a life that works but doesn't exactly land. So what I mean is like a respectable job or comfortable home, stable relationships. Basically a functioning routine. But there's this persistent nagging that it's like this feeling that doesn't fully belong, like it doesn't all fully belong to you. You're living someone else's version of a good life, maybe. You followed all the right steps, but you arrived at somewhere you didn't intend to go. None of these things are failure. They're just patterns. Patterns that made sense once, usually from childhood, and that you never had permission, either from somebody else or from yourself, or the actual language to examine why these patterns occurred. I'd like to invite you to turn inward. Which of those patterns showed up for you just now, listening to this? Where do you think in your life you're choosing familiar over true? Who are the people who like you for a version of yourself that isn't truly the whole truth? So what's the cost of disconnection? Because I think the stakes are real. There's a cost when we perform instead of live, spending years and sometimes decades playing a role that doesn't fully belong to us. That cost doesn't always look like something you might expect. Rather than feeling dramatic, it feels more like a slow erosion or a gradual dimming of yourself. The first thing that tends to go is maybe a low-grade dissatisfaction with your life. It's not happiness exactly, but that matters too. But the deeper sense that what you are doing means something to you, that you're in it. That's what kind of goes away. Psychologists Dici and Ryan developed self-determination theory, which I've spoken about in other podcasts. They identified autonomy, competence, and relatedness as the 3 human psychological needs for well-being. When we perform and live inauthentically, the result is usually not acute misery, but it's a persistent flatness, maybe a hollowness at the center of a life that otherwise looks fine. It's the heaviness you can't explain, or the emptiness that settles in at the end of a perfectly normal day and makes you think, what's wrong with me? Why am I not happy? Everything's great. I witnessed this in a few times in people that enough is never enough. They purchase something big or small, and something they've always thought that they wanted or needed. And the thrill of that purchase, of getting what they wanted, fades out almost immediately. The flatness returns, and sometimes that's within hours. It becomes so normal to fill their life with things that they barely notice the pattern. It seems like they're filling their lives with anything and everything except for themselves, for the true self. And because it looks like living, and there's always something new and shiny to get, or plan for, or take a vacation, the cause of that heaviness, that flatness that they experience, it stays invisible. The second cost of these patterns is emotional numbness, or the exact opposite, a restlessness you can't quite locate or ever satisfy. Physician and trauma expert Gabor Mate has spent decades studying what happens when we learn early in life that certain emotions are unsafe to express. Over time, that suppression doesn't just affect our inner lives. It disconnects us from our bodies, our instincts, and our ability to feel fully present in what we experience. We can go numb. We have joy, but it doesn't land the way it used to. Like, it's not fun anymore. Things that matter sometimes feel distant. Others feel the exact opposite, a persistent undercurrent of anxiety, agitation, a sense that something is wrong even when they can't point to exactly what it is. Both responses are the self signaling to your brain, to you, to your body, your conscious mind, that something is out of alignment. I think the most honest and least talked about symptom of a performed life is it's not rage or bitterness, but it's a low, steady, barely acknowledged resentment toward your own life, toward the obligations you agreed to, toward the expectations you have spent so long working to meet, toward the choices that seem right at the time, but have slowly become a kind of cage that entraps you. Carl Rogers, who founded humanistic psychology and whose work on conditions of worth I've touched on earlier in this podcast, spent years documenting exactly this, and his conclusion was very direct. When love and acceptance come with conditions attached to it, we spend years meeting those conditions at the expense of our own truth. Resentment is not a character flaw. It's what happens when the self has been overridden too long without acknowledgement. And because it feels ungrateful or unfair to admit that, most people push it down. They don't examine it. They just carry it. And finally, there's the experience that I believe is the most disorienting of all, the feeling of watching your own life from the outside. Like, you're present for it, you show up, you go through the right motions, but you're not quite in it. It's called depersonalization and feels like there's a glass panel between you and your own experiences. I think it exists on a spectrum, and the mild, chronic version is well documented in people experiencing identity suppression. No crisis needed, just a long enough time spent being someone other than yourself. And that feeling, more than anything else, is what brings people into my coaching practice. It's not really the big catastrophes, but it's the sense of removal from their own story. I want to stop here and give you a chance to sit with what performing does to your well-being. Which of these costs resonates most for you right now? Flatness, feeling numb, restlessness, subtle resentment, or the feeling of watching from a distance? Just try to name it. Reserve your judgment of yourself. The naming is already something. It's already a first step from opening the cage door and looking outward. Here's what I want you to know about when people start to wake up to this pattern, because it rarely looks the way we think it will. We tend to imagine that the realization will come as a breakdown, a crisis, a moment of rock bottom so undeniable that the only way forward is total reinvention. And for some people, maybe something like that can happen. But for most people, it's slower. It's more like a persistent whisper that gradually becomes louder too loud to ignore. Carl Jung wrote about what he called individuation, the lifelong process of separating the authentic self from the persona. If you don't know, persona is the Latin word for meaning mask. It's the version of ourselves that we construct for the world to see. He believed that the moments that begin this process are rarely thunderclaps of clarity. They're often more small or slightly bewildering instances of noticing that something no longer fits. It might arrive in the middle of a perfectly ordinary day, driving to work, maybe washing dishes or sitting in a meeting where you just catch yourself and think, why doesn't this feel like me? It's not any fanfare. It's just a muted recognition that the life you're living feels designed for someone else. It could come through exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion, although that can be a part of it, but it's the deep tiredness of performing, of maintaining, of showing up as the version of yourself everyone expects, because that's what you've taught them. While the version of yourself that is true stays waiting or unexpressed in the background, the little wallflower. It can arrive through envy as well. You hear about someone's life or someone's choices, and you feel a pull you can't quite explain. Not because you want their specific life, but because something in their story touched something in yours. Hillary McBride is a therapist who reframed envy in a way that I find pretty useful. She described it not as a flaw or something to be ashamed of, but as the self pointing towards something it wants, yet hasn't permitted itself to pursue. It's pretty good. In other words, envy's not really about the other person. It's the self-knowledge in disguise. These moments are not breakdowns. They're not failures even. They're your original self asking to be included. They are awareness catching up to something that has been true for a very long time. And the most important thing about all of this that I want you to hear is that it's not a sign that something has gone wrong. The envy, the exhaustion, it's finally something going right. Think about this. Have you had one of those moments recently? A brief instance where something inside you said, this doesn't feel like me. Think about what was happening when that thought came to you. And then what did you do with it? What did you do with the feeling after you thought it? Something else I see in my practice is that people will take awareness and immediately use it as evidence against themselves. If you have recognized any of what I've described today in yourself, the performing, the disconnection, the quiet cost of it, there's a very good chance that some part of you in your mind has already translated that recognition into something like, oh, I've wasted so much time, or I should have known this sooner. I've made so many wrong choices. I want to gently but firmly say to you, that is not this lesson. What you were doing wasn't failure. It was adaptation. Not failure, adaptation. As I said earlier, adaptation is intelligence. It's what kept you connected, kept you safe, kept you functional during the years when you didn't have the language or the distance or the support to do anything differently. You were not sleepwalking. You were surviving. And that is an important distinction. What's happening now? The awareness or the noticing or the discomfort that brought you to an episode called Why You Feel Disconnected from Your Life, that is not a verdict on who you have been. It's really an invitation to who you can be. Awareness is not an accusation. It's the beginning. And I think that's exciting. There's something I come back to again and again in my coaching work, and it is this. You cannot change what you cannot see. The performance worked precisely because it was invisible, right? To you as much to anyone else. It was just the water you were swimming in. It was just life. And the moment you begin to see it, and I mean really see it, you gain something you didn't have before. You gain a choice. And choice, even if it's a small one, even if it's imperfect, that's where change begins. So if you're sitting with this today and feeling the weight of it, I want you to hold alongside that weight the fact that you are here. You're paying attention. And paying attention to your own life, I think, is one of the most courageous and most consequential things you can do. So pause here. Ask yourself, what would it mean for me to interpret this awareness not as evidence of failure, but being at the very beginning of something? What could become possible if you actually chose to start from there? So what do we actually do with all of this? I never want to leave you in a place of awareness without also giving you something real to carry off into your week. The steps I'll offer are not a dramatic overhaul. It's not a list of sweeping changes that by Wednesday, you're a completely different person. They consist of small, honest steps. The first step is beginning to notice when you are performing. Not to judge, not to fix it. Well, at least immediately. It's just to notice. Start to pay attention to the moments when you say yes and you really mean no. The moments when you choose what looks right over what feels true to yourself. The moments when you edit yourself before you speak, or when you manage the impression rather than offer the reality of who you are. You don't need to change all of those moments at the same time or even right away. Just start seeing them, start noticing them, because seeing them is what makes it possible. It makes a choice possible when there wasn't really one before or one that you could see. The second step is to ask yourself a question. It's a simple one that I've given to many clients and one that continues to reveal a great deal. The question is this: is this true for me or is it just familiar? Ask it when you're about to make a decision, when you're about to respond in a certain way, like a certain way of an old pattern. Or when you feel pulled in a direction you can't fully explain. Ask, is this true for me? Does it reflect something I actually value? Something I actually want? Something that genuinely aligns with you and who I am? Or is it just familiar? the path I've always taken, the role I've always played, the answer I have always given. Not because it's mine, but it's because it's known. The difference between those two questions is the difference between a performed life and a lived one. And you will not always be able to answer it clearly right away. There's no way. Sometimes the honest answer is, you don't know. And that's valid. And it's an important answer because I don't know yet is the first truly honest thing that many of us can say. The third step, and the one I want you to sit with the longest, is to permit yourself to start very small. I mean it. Alignment starts in the small moments. One honest conversation, one boundary that actually reflects what you need. Maybe it's one moment where you let someone see a slightly more real version of who you are. Those moments will accumulate. Over time, they'll build. And they become the path to your original self, to your true self. The last questions I'll ask you are, what is one small, honest shift you can make this week? Not something enormous, not a life overhaul, okay? Just one moment where you choose what is true over what is familiar. What would that even look like to you? I want to leave you with a mindset shift that hopefully stays with you. The disconnection you've been feeling is not a sign that something's wrong with you. It's not ingratitude or weakness or even confusion. It's your original self letting you know that it's been waiting. Hear that. It's been very patient. Underneath all of that adapting and adjusting and ultimately performing, it's still intact and very much alive. The performing was never who you were. It's what you learned. Everything learned can be unlearned. Maybe not at all at once, or without discomfort, but in that slow, steady, honest way that real change always happens. It's one true thing at a time. You don't have to blow up your life to come back to yourself. Sometimes it starts with something you almost miss. It's noticing when you stopped being in your own life. And if today was the day that you noticed that, then something significant has already started. If anything in this episode stirred something within you, I'd love to continue that conversation. Coaching is where this kind of work gets to dig deeper, where you get to take the noticing and turn it into something real and lasting. You can find me at dakotalifecoaching.com. I genuinely love what I do, and I would love to work with you. Thank you for being here, and I will see you next week. Have a wonderful day.